On a rainy day, a young man named Angelo Bruno returns to his apartment from the city. As he makes his way inside, a neighbor stops him and hands over a letter addressed to his father. Angelo takes it without a word and heads into his apartment. Inside, he opens the envelope and begins to read. Slowly, a chilling smile creeps across his face, the kind only a true psychopath could wear. 7 years earlier, we see Angelo was just an ordinary kid, living with his father Testa, his mother, and his sister Lechi, and one day they were playing happily with their close friend Corteo, laughing and enjoying every moment, until after a while Corteo said goodbye because he had to head home, got on his bicycle, and rode away. And right after that, Testa came back from work, so Angelo and Lechi hid inside the wardrobe, planning to jump out and surprise him. And when Testa entered, he actually started looking for them with a smile, the two of them giggling quietly inside, but suddenly there was a knock on the door, and when Testa opened it, he saw a man named Vanetti standing there, who told him that their boss had been killed, and angrily asked who had done it, whether it was the men from the Orge gang. But then Vanetti's expression suddenly changed, and with cold eyes he said, "I'm the one who killed the boss," pulling out a gun and pointing it straight at Testa's face, all while Angelo and Lechi were watching from their hiding spot. Angelo trying hard to control his fear while Lechi was quietly crying, and he pressed his hand over her mouth so she wouldn't make a sound, while their mother desperately tried to plead with Vanetti not to harm anyone. But he struck her hard, sending her falling back, and in that instant Lechi couldn't take it anymore, bursting out of the wardrobe despite Angelo's desperate attempt to stop her, and she ran straight to her mother, throwing her arms around her, and at that moment Testa seized the chance, grabbing a knife and lunging at Vanetti, slashing with all his strength. But Vanetti blocked the attack with his hand, which was badly cut. So Testa spun the knife and attacked again with all his might, but it only left a shallow wound on Vanetti, and in the next instant the two men with Vanetti opened fire, shooting down Testa, his wife, and little Lechi, killing them all instantly, while Angelo stood there, frozen in horror, tears streaming uncontrollably, unable to bear the sight, and Vanetti ordered his men to find the boy, and they began searching every corner, one of them heading straight for the wardrobe where Angelo had been hiding, opening it, only to find it empty, so he turned back. The search continued outside the room, and at that moment we saw Angelo, who had been hiding under a chair, trembling in fear, and in a flash he sprang up and bolted from the place, but one of the men spotted him and gave chase, unable to catch him, so he immediately fired a shot, and thank God the bullet missed Angelo, who kept running as fast as he could until he reached Corteo's house, where his friend quickly brought him inside, telling him, "Stay here, and don't worry about anything else because you and I are not just friends, we're brothers." And Angelo thanked him, while Corteo left him alone to rest, and the day ended. The next morning, Angelo woke up early, slipped out of Corteo's house without telling him, and left the city entirely, determined to live somewhere far away. And so, after all these events, the years went by, and we saw Corteo grown older, when suddenly a young man came to him, asking if he would sell some moonshine to the mafia. But Corteo refused, not wanting to get involved with them, so the man said fine and turned to leave. But in the blink of an eye, a huge thug appeared, smashing him in the head with a brutal blow before storming into Corteo's home and wrecking the place. Then, completely unexpectedly, another figure appeared. It was Angelo, now older, and with one decisive strike he hit the giant in the head so hard it sent him crashing, after which he sat down with Corteo, who, still shocked, asked, "Where have you been these past 7 years, Angelo?" But he replied that his name now was Fio, and that he had come back for a specific reason, making Corteo curious. So Angelo told him, "I want you to sell moonshine to the mafia." But Corteo refused, so Angelo repeated his request, saying softly, "Please, I need you to do this." Since the first Prohibition era, liquor had become expensive contraband, and on Sandbar Island, where prices were the highest, an old church-turned bar was hosting two men pitching their booze to a wary owner who suspected they'd stolen it from the Oakle gang's border run, and outside, blonde cowboy Van Gao beat a guard for letting it get stolen. At the same time, Angelo and Corteo entered. Angelo poured the owner a glass, only for it to be dumped on the floor with an insult, yet Angelo calmly poured another, making the owner ready to swing until a bearded man at the bar lit a match over the glass, igniting a blue flame that proved its strength, and after a sip he declared it good. But before anyone could speak, Van Gao shoved a gun at Corteo, asking if he was Nero, and Angelo pulled a knife from a crate, claiming he was. Van Gao pushed Corteo aside and pressed his gun to Angelo's hat brim, only for Angelo to grab the barrel and press his knife to Van Gao's neck. But Corteo was grabbed by Van Gao's men, and Van Gao ordered them to kill him. Certain Angelo wouldn't act. During the standoff, the bearded man knocked Angelo's knife away with a glass. Van Gogh broke free and fired wildly through the bar as Angelo and Corteo dove behind the counter. And while the bearded man and his partner debated how to handle the madman, Angelo began tossing liquor toward him while Corteo worked on something unseen, until finally Corteo hurled one last bottle and Van Gogh tossed another toward the door, signaling the bearded man to run. But when Van Gogh fired 2 quick shots at the bottle, it exploded, and in an instant, a wall of fire roared up beside him. With the guard at the car taken out, the 4 of them made their escape in the vehicle, and that final bottle had been filled by Corteo with melted candles, wild paraffin that ignited the moment it touched water, proving once again that, with a little skill, you could walk anywhere without fear. Angelo, curious, asked if the Nero they were looking for had been in the bar, and to his surprise, the bearded man pulled off his beard, revealing a handsome face. He was Nero himself. Since the start of Prohibition, brewing and selling moonshine had been illegal, and the city's liquor routes were controlled by the Orco gang. Late at night, Vano from the Fango family and his underlings stole a crate of liquor from Orco territory, only to be stopped midway by patrols. They had no time to hide the goods and dove into the woods, and when the patrol left, Vano thought they were safe, until a man emerged from the trees and attacked. He managed to shake the pursuer and hide under a car just as the patrol returned, only then noticing his partner was already dead, barely escaping with his life under the vehicle. Today was the wedding of the Fango family's young lady to the nephew of Chicago boss Galacia's leader. Angelo and Corteo came to deliver wine to Nero, but this time Angelo didn't ask for payment, saying it was just their gift. After a brief chat, Barbero came for Nero, saying his father wanted to see him. Once Nero left, Corteo looked at Angelo, puzzled. Weren't they here to make money? Corteo wanted to leave this dangerous place quickly, but Angelo said since they were here, they might as well have some fun. Recently, tensions between the Fango and Orco gangs had escalated, with Orco taking territory and roots. To secure their position, Nero's sister was marrying Galacia's nephew. Nero's younger brother Frate believed Galacia's protection would keep them safe, but Nero knew that a family unable to defend its own turf had no future. The Fango boss Vincent, the very man who had slaughtered Angelo's family, was now nearing the end of his life, hoping to strengthen his gang before he died, and he advised Nero to keep his head down and move forward carefully. Nero only replied cryptically that fate had already abandoned them. Vano openly looked down on the groom, Ronaldo, calling him a useless fool, while the smug Ronaldo, no saint himself, came over to mock Vano's backwater origins. Before Vano could react, Angelo stepped in, calling Ronaldo a cowardly parasite. Ronaldo was about to lash out when Vano restrained him, and it was the bride, Fio, who ended the quarrel. Angelo poured Barbero a drink and learned that the wine was actually brewed in Corteo's kitchen, leaving Barbero stunned enough to pull Corteo aside for a private talk, while Angelo used the chance to bond with Vano by mocking Ronaldo together. Over dinner, Nero met with the senior women of the family, all of whom were pleased with Angelo and Corteo, believing that with Corteo's wine, they could avoid pointless conflict with Orco. Vano still wanted Van Gogh dead, but Nero refused, saying Galacia wanted peace between them. Outraged, Vano swore that even alone he'd take Orco down. Nero then changed tone, saying if that was the case then fine, but the first target wouldn't be Van Gogh. Soon after, Vano approached Angelo, promising him a place in the Fango family if he killed Van Gogh. Angelo agreed without hesitation, so Vano gave him a gun and bullets, explaining Van Gogh spent every Wednesday night at a certain place. After Vano left, Corteo called Angelo insane for siding with the mafia, but Angelo handed him the letter he'd received from someone claiming to be his father, naming the man who had killed his entire family. That night, Angelo made his move, pretending to be a drunk collapsed outside Van Gogh's residence, but was violently kicked away by Van Gogh's man, Serpente, until the already bought-off Gerlaud arrived, distracting Serpente with a fake errand. Angelo slipped inside, expecting something shady, only to find that Van Gogh was a shameless pervert in the middle of a whipping game with his lover. Spotting Angelo in the mirror, Van Gogh rolled away from a fatal shot. Angelo had no intention of harming the woman, but Van Gogh grabbed her as a shield and fired several rounds before leaping from the balcony to the rooftop across the street. The gunfire drew Serpente back, but Vano ambushed him, knocking him out, and recognized him as the one who had killed his comrade. With police on the way, Angelo retreated as Vano dragged Serpente to an old ranch, where he executed him in front of his friend's grave. As Vano turned to leave, Angelo stepped from behind a tree and shot him, because the men who had slaughtered his family that night were Vincent, his son Nero, and Vano. After killing Vano, Angelo told Nero that Vano and Serpente had died together, but when he brought Nero to the scene, only Vano's body remained. Nero suspected Angelo was an Orco spy and ordered him to produce Serpente's corpse. When Angelo returned home, Corteo was waiting at the table, and upon hearing about the missing body, he went to Gerlot, asking if he'd been with Angelo and Vano at Van Gao's place the night before. With Vano now dead, suspicion was falling on Gerlot, and Angelo had orders to kill him. Gerlot, clearly shaken, thought of fleeing, but Corteo reassured him that he'd kept it from Angelo, finally making Gerlot lower his guard. In truth, Angelo had gone to Van Gao's apartment only to lure Serpente away, but curiosity made him secretly follow Vano to the cemetery, where he heard a gunshot the moment he arrived. When he rushed over, Vano and Serpente were both dead, but now the problem was Serpente's corpse had vanished, and if things stayed this way, it would look like Angelo had killed Vano and let Serpente go. Gerlot, regretting his greed, decided to leave, but Angelo walked in, pressing a gun to him and demanding the truth, until Gerlot confessed that he had sold Serpente's body to the newly appointed Federal Prohibition Bureau chief, Scusa. Angelo forced him to take him to the body, warning that Nero's men were at the door, and if Gerlot lied, it wouldn't end well. Meanwhile, Scusa approached the Fango family, saying he had Serpente's body. Vano had kidnapped an Orco family man, and both had died together. If this news spread, it would spark fresh conflict between the gangs, forcing Galacia to act, so the only way was for Fango to buy the body. Vincent told Scusa to bring it. In a fancy restaurant, a chef, angry over too little butter in the lasagna, decided to throw explosives onto Fango turf, clearly their doing. Orco boss Otwin's fork nearly stabbed Van Gao's foot, but Galacia wanted peace with Fango and wouldn't make a big fuss over Van Gao's minor injury. Van Gao, free to do as he pleased, stabbed a subordinate's hand and stormed off, still hunting for Serpente, even planning to question Fango directly when he spotted Nero's car and swerved to follow. Angelo and Corteo arrived at a nearly demolished building where Scusa kept his stash. They had just stepped inside when Angelo, hearing movement, drew his gun toward the door, relieved when it was only Nero in the hallway. Back at Fango HQ, Ronaldo urged Vincent to kill Nero to settle the dispute with Orco, sparking anger from his deputy Ganzo, while Frade, Nero's brother, fanned the flames, arguing that if Galacia learned Serpente's killer was Nero, they wouldn't let it go, so it was better they did it themselves. Vincent said he would handle it, but after Ronaldo left, Frate suggested helping Nero escape, claiming the gang had followed Galacia's orders to kill him, but Nero had gotten away. Sensing a trap, Nero went upstairs to find Angelo. Outside, Van Gao, who'd once beaten up the unlucky driver guarding the door, now grabbed him again just as Nero was holding a hooded Serpente inside. Van Gao proposed a one-for-one trade, Serpente for the driver. Both lowered their guns, stepping forward to exchange, but as Serpente came closer, Van Gao noticed something off. The build was wrong, and there was suspicious blood on the chest. Pretending not to care, Van Gao suddenly pulled a gun from his crotch and aimed at Serpente's head, only for Serpente to kick the weapon away. The bullet hit the chandelier above, and as Van Gao tried to slash him, the hood came off to reveal Angelo in disguise. Nero and his ally drew and fired, retreating quickly while Van Gao, too late to shoot back, found Serpente's real corpse inside. Not sad at all, but thrilled at the excuse to wage war on Fango. On the way back, Nero's car was stopped by Frate, telling him to leave the city at once. Barbero still had the wine business to run and couldn't go, but Nero also couldn't travel without protection, so Angelo volunteered, saying Van Gao was already after him. Nero agreed, and as Angelo turned away, Corteo caught a glimpse of his satisfied smile. That night, when Scusa came looking for Serpente's body, it was far too late. Nero secretly attended Vano's funeral, then left town with Angelo on a road trip, unaware killers were tracking them. Vano had been deeply fond of Nero's sister, and when she was set to marry Ronaldo, she, unable to drink, had gone to a bar and gotten herself completely drunk. Remembering it now left Nero both sad and frustrated. They'd been on the road for a week, with Angelo driving painfully slow until Nero, hungry, slammed the gas, flying forward and startling a Mexican man hitchhiking by the roadside. The two stopped for lunch at a diner, where Angelo drenched his pancakes in syrup to a tooth-aching sweetness that was just right for him. Nero asked the hostess about nearby motels, but she suggested a town called Cata, up ahead, with a motor camp renting tents. While the Mexican flagged down a passing cart, Angelo and Nero pulled into the camp, braking so hard they startled the greeter at the gate. Inside were many children, and a nun was hanging a piñata in midair. Blindfolded boys took swings until it burst, spilling candy that the kids snatched up in delight. Watching, Nero grew nostalgic. He'd played the same game with his brother as a child, so he went to the nun and showed the kids his ball-throwing skills, quickly winning their admiration with flashy tricks. Then a boy pointed to Angelo, asking what he could do. Nero waved it off, saying someone so gloomy and boring probably knew nothing, but Angelo patted Nero's shoulder and revealed Nero's wallet in his hand, followed by his belt, forcing Nero to hold up his pants in embarrassment. After publicly toying with Nero, Angelo spread his hands to signal the end of his act, drawing cheers and applause from the little audience, who raised Nero's wallet in his hand, followed by his belt, forcing Nero to hold up his pants in embarrassment. After publicly toying with Nero, that night they camped by the river, where Angelo tried Nero's ball-throwing trick but failed, prompting Nero to share a few tips, recalling that when he was 10, a circus had come to town, and he and Vano had stolen Vincent's money to see it, got caught and beaten, but still felt happy because in their empty little town, such people never came. Their talk turned to their pasts. Angelo said he had grown up in an orphanage before turning to gangster work, learning to pick pockets back then. At first, his hands trembled, but now he could do it without a thought. He asked Nero what his first job was. Nero's face darkened as he admitted it was to threaten a man who had stolen from the gang, Angelo's father. He'd been just 14 and Angelo pressed him, asking if he'd gone alone. Nero said there were 4 of them, and when the target panicked, the youngest had fired a shot but missed, after which Nero stopped thinking and kept killing until today, only to end up penniless and on the run. Nero fell asleep after telling his story. While Angelo stared at the letter, the sender claimed the only ones who killed his family were Vincent, Nero, and Vano. Yet Nero had just said there was a 4th man. Who was the mysterious 4th? The next day, they reached a small town, ran into police right after getting out of the car, and Nero bribed them to ask where liquor could be bought, while Angelo stole the officer's wallet. Nero phoned Barbero, who warned him not to linger. Orko had sent a killer after them, said to be a man bigger than a giant. While Nero was gone, tensions had again flared between Fango, Van Gogh, and Orko. Angelo went shopping and bought piles of canned pineapple, while Nero, short on cash, wandered into an underground bar for fun, but couldn't buy more drinks. At the same time, the Mexican man arrived in town. The police, under the guise of collecting fines, took his wallet, then checked his cart, finding the body of a murdered man. The Mexican struck, choking the officer from behind and forcing him to reveal Nero and Angelo's location. In the bar, Nero was arm wrestling for cash when the Mexican appeared, eager to face him. But as soon as it started, the Mexican overpowered Nero, then smashed him in the face with fists like hammers. Nero fought back with a vicious kick to the man's groin, leaving him writhing, then left compensation money and walked out. The Mexican recovered, went into the street, and seconds later, rammed Angelo's car, flipping it. The car totaled. The man unharmed, so the two grabbed their bags and ran. Late that night, they hid in a small cabin at a lumberyard, blocking the door and crouching behind hay bales, certain the man's hunting dog would track them. But the Mexican didn't play by the rules. He leapt in through the window, wielding twin blades in a relentless assault, shrugging off bullets. After a brutal fight, Nero hurled a knife into his back, thinking it was over. But as they left, a rancher appeared with a gun, and Angelo suddenly tackled Nero as the shots instead struck the ghostly figure of the Mexican right behind them. Only after multiple rounds did he finally collapse dead. The terrified rancher wondered what monster he was, and Nero gave him the stolen wallet, asking him to care for the dog. They then had fled in the Mexican's wagon, and a starving Nero tried Angelo's beloved canned pineapple, sweet enough to make him question life. Soon after, Nero learned Orko planned to make peace with Fango. Orko had tried and failed to kill Van Gogh, who had gathered over 20 men on an island to face Orko, and neither gang could fight both sides. Frade convinced Ronaldo to drop his grudge against Nero, and Nero thought he could finally stop running. But Roberto said it wasn't so simple and told him to meet in a small cabin before entering the city. After their long escape, Nero trusted Angelo enough to share a cigarette, asking if he'd join the gang when they returned. Angelo took it, but didn't answer. Nero drove into the mountains to a disused tunnel that doubled as a moonshine workshop, Roberto's cabin, where brewing Corteo's Warren's Paradise liquor had made them a fortune, priced higher than imports from Canada. But because of its complex recipe, it couldn't be mass-produced. Angelo was shocked Corteo had joined Nero's crew, and seeing him smile at Angelo and Nero's banter made him uneasy. When would Angelo strike? Wasn't Nero his revenge target? Angelo said to get to Vincent, he had to win Nero's trust first. Then Nero called Angelo over, saying he'd take him to meet the Fango boss. Angelo gave Corteo a look. The day to kill them wasn't far. Nero planned to take Angelo to the old mansion, and Roberto warned him to be careful no matter what, and keep an eye on Ronaldo. Early next morning, Frade went to negotiate with Orko. Despite setbacks, the two gangs reached peace. Frade brought wine to the guard Tirego, inviting him in for a drink to celebrate Nero's return, while Nero and Angelo spent the night surveilling the Orko boss before driving back to the mansion. Inside, Nero's expression grew tense as he noticed the guard rotation had changed, so he slowed his steps, was already slowing the car to carefully observe when Tirego stepped out of the mansion and waved to him. Nero's face instantly changed, and he slammed the gas, driving straight up to pull Tirego inside just as a group of armed men in black ran from the mansion, one of them shooting Tirego in the shoulder mid-sprint. The Orco-aligned guard dropped another man aiming at Nero, opened the gate, and fled with them. It turned out Tirego was Nero's plant to watch Ronaldo, and though he was badly wounded, they couldn't risk a hospital without revealing their location. Back at the old mansion, the one Nero had been wary of was Frate, who had used the raised hand greeting with Tirego as a danger signal. Killing Nero had failed, so Frate was summoned by Vincent to answer for it. Orco's condition for peace was Nero's death, but Frate hadn't told Vincent, knowing he'd never agree, even though without it they couldn't get Orco's protection. Vincent and Frate argued until Ronaldo entered, saying only Frate could take over Fango. Otherwise, they'd be handing the city to Orco, so Nero had to die. Nero's group hid in a dockside warehouse. Tirego's bleeding slowed but still dire. Barbero and Corteo arrived. With Orco in control of the roads and ferries, it was only a matter of time before they were found. The situation was dangerous, and that night Corteo talked with Angelo, saying he wanted to run away with him, that staying meant death anyway. Angelo refused. Leaving now meant losing his chance at Vincent, and there was still the mysterious fourth man the letter never named. To Angelo, without revenge, his life meant nothing. By next morning, Tirego was unconscious, unlikely to last the day. Just as they were about to give up, Angelo said there was one way: go to Van Gao's island. Nero was furious, saying Van Gao had killed too many of his men, and Barbero reminded him Van Gao had no reason to help them. Their only other option was to flee to the cabin. That night, Angelo lured Corteo out for a drink, then loaded wine onto a small boat and headed for the island. By the time Nero gave chase, it was too late. Angelo brought a bottle as an apology for the train incident, and Van Gao recognized him immediately, saying he'd take him to someone. Corteo was shocked to see Gerlo there, who warned that the person Van Gao wanted to meet was even crazier. Angelo cut straight to it. He wanted Van Gao to hide them. Van Gao laughed, asking why he should help Nero, who'd killed Serpente and tried to attack him, and aimed a gun at Angelo, only to put it away a moment later, asking what was in it for him. Corteo, furious, thought Angelo was betraying them, but then returned himself as Nero's hostage, telling him to bring Tirego to the island or they'd all die. Barbero and Volpe doubted it, thinking it was a trap, but Angelo had already made a deal. If they brought Orco's leader alive, Van Gao could take over the gang. Van Gao asked how, and Angelo said he didn't know. It was Nero's idea. Nero, baffled, had no plan, but Angelo's trick was to make Van Gao believe they did, so he wouldn't harm them. Nero still said he wouldn't work with Van Gao, but with an unconscious comrade, he followed Corteo to the island. Van Gao asked for the plan. Nero dodged, saying he was hungry, then tried to stab Van Gao's foot with a table knife when ordered to lick his shoe. Van Gao laughed and ordered him food. Meanwhile, in an upscale restaurant, Ronaldo met with Frate and Orco's leader, who was angry Frate had let Nero escape. Ronaldo asked what they'd learned, and Orco mentioned Nero's profits from Warren's Paradise, wanting a share. Kill Nero and the recipe and workshop would be theirs. Once Nero was gone, Orco could start their revival. But before Fango could act, the next day Nero and Angelo walked into Orco's place, saying they had business. Orco never intended to let him leave alive, pouring Nero a drink and telling him to savor it before the grave. Surrounded by guns, Nero calmly tasted it, a fine 30-year-old Windsor, but outdated. He poured a new glass from his flask, saying it had been brewed only 3 weeks ago. Orco drank and was stunned. This was Warren's Paradise. With it, no more bribes to border guards, no more smuggling over long distances. If Orco backed them, they'd have it all. Nero took Orco to the moonshine workshop in the tunnel, where his men checked it was real. Orco satisfied. Orco still remembered Angelo from the attempted hit on Van Gao, and when Angelo asked if he recalled his surname, Orco shook his head. Angelo introduced himself as Angelo Lagusa, and at the sound of the name, Orco's eyes went wide. Angelo said his father's killer was Vincent, and just then the scouts returned to confirm the tunnel really was a moonshine workshop. With it and the recipe, Orco could control the whole city. But the recipe was Nero's bargaining chip for his life, and he wouldn't hand it over easily. He popped a bottle, drank straight from it, and invited Orco to toast their new friendship. But Orco, ever cautious, spotted unused barrels in the corner and ordered his men to fire into them. As liquor spilled out, one was revealed to be empty. Before Orko could react, Volpe stepped forward with a machine gun and opened fire, turning the distillery into a war zone. Nero dove for cover, only to turn and find Angelo, somehow unharmed, aiming at him with a cold, shadowed face, the moment he'd been waiting for. 2 shots rang out, and when Orko checked, Nero lay still on the floor. A subordinate suggested killing Angelo too, but Orko punched him, saying Angelo had avenged his father, and he admired that. The 3 drank together to celebrate the downfall of Van Gogh and Fango. With this liquor, Orko wouldn't have to bow to Galassia anymore. Orko was dreaming of the future when dizziness overtook him, and just before passing out, he saw Nero's grinning face. The 2 had honored their deal to deliver Orko to Van Gogh. Nero praised Angelo's performance. He'd hidden chicken blood under his shirt so Angelo could kill him and win Orko's trust. And Angelo admitted there'd been genuine feeling in the act. Soon, Van Gogh became Orko's boss, and his first act was to host a meal for several captains, serving Orko's favorite lasagna. It was delicious, until someone choked on a hard object and spat out a human tooth. Yes, the lasagna was made from Orko's flesh. As the captains retched, Van Gogh burst into manic laughter. Terego recovered, and everyone shared a meal, but Nero knew life would only grow more dangerous. As the street punk rose to gang boss, even his hair and demeanor changed, his madness cured. With Orko gone, Van Gogh set his sights on the Fango family, and Nero, tied to him, had no choice but to help. Nero knew they were just pawns. Once useless, they'd be discarded along with Warren's paradise. Angelo suggested returning to Fango, but that meant dealing with Frate and Ronaldo. Learning Orko had changed hands, Frate was so stressed he couldn't eat or sleep until Ronaldo came to comfort him, saying the only way to save the family was for Nero to die, handing him a small packet to drink and rest. Nero brought Warren's paradise to a Fango bar to sell, only to be caught by Ganzo, who urged him to return, promising to mediate. Many still supported Nero, but with him gone, the gang's income had plummeted, further agitating Frate. Ronaldo pressed Ganzo's point. Nero must die, as Galassia's leader wanted Frate to succeed. He gathered the siblings, hoping Nero and Frate would talk, but while Nero said he acted to protect the family, Frate accused him of clinging to pride, warning defiance of Galassia would destroy them. Nero countered that Galassia meant to swallow Fango, and Frate was blind. Frate, angry since childhood at Nero's free-spirited ways, said everything would be fine if Nero were dead, and was slapped by Fio, who begged them to reconcile, reminding them family should never kill family. Fio's words reached Nero, and he resolved to meet Ronaldo, which Angelo did not want. He wanted Nero and Frate at each other's throats. Angelo told Nero he had a brother to meet soon, but secretly warned Nero's loyal man Volpe that if Nero went to Ronaldo, he'd die. Wanting to protect Nero, Volpe obeyed. On Sunday, as Ronaldo accompanied Frate to church, Volpe struck, wounding Ronaldo's arm and taking a hit himself. Angelo shook Frate's pursuit, stopped to bandage Volpe, and then shot him dead, staging it to look like Volpe had died in a car accident, fell to the ground pretending to commit suicide, leaving Frate in a cold sweat. Even with Ganzo assuring him Nero wasn't behind it, Frate refused to believe, convinced that after injuring Ronaldo there was no going back. Between them, it was kill or be killed. He hung Volpe's body from a bridge in public, and the brothers' feud truly began. The Fango family split, conflict erupted, and Frate's mind teetered on the edge. He'd had enough, and even thought of asking Ronaldo to take him to Galassia, only to be harshly scolded. That night, Ronaldo told Fio to contact Nero. If things went on, Frate would be killed by him, the family would fall to Galassia, and Nero himself would die, along with their unborn child. Yes, Fio was pregnant. The baby was their only hope, the symbol of a Galassia-Fango union. With the feud tearing them apart, even Nero had grown tired, and when he got Fio's call, he sent Angelo ahead with flowers, saying he'd arrive later. Fio found a note hidden in the bouquet. Ronaldo claimed he wanted to talk to Nero, but after Angelo left, he tucked a gun into his waistband. Fio realized it was too late. Galassia meant to kill her brother, and making him a puppet was their only offer to Fango. Frate knew it too. Ronaldo tried to comfort her, but a gunshot rang out. Fio had killed him, saying she had no choice for her family. Afterward, Angelo entered to retrieve the note. With the tide turned, Nero appeared before Frate, not to kill, but to exile him to the countryside. Frate raged. He'd worked so hard, only to have his father see Nero when all he'd ever wanted was recognition. Angelo lifted a book before him, revealing a hidden gun. He picked it up, examined it, then set it back down, letting the brothers end it themselves. Frate steeled himself and pulled the trigger, only for nothing to happen. Nero, reacting instinctively, fired fired into Frate's chest. Angelo tossed the bullet he'd removed into a flower pot, hiding his hand in the affair. He then put Fio on a train to Chicago, telling her to say Frate had killed Ronaldo, and Nero, loyal to Galacia, had slain his own brother. The new Prohibition Bureau chief, Delphi, took office vowing to wipe out the city's gangs. Van Gao's gang was expanding with the city's power brokers, while Fango, fresh from its internal strife, was nominally led by Vincent's eldest, Nero. Their prized Warren's Paradise liquor fetched high prices at home and abroad, but Nero's popularity couldn't hide the fact he exploited the people. Crime worsened under the gang wars, and the police's first plan was to cut off bootlegging and destroy the gangs. Barbero suggested scaling back production, but Nero refused, saying the sinful citizens still needed it. Van Gogh saw it as the perfect time to crush Fango. At a restaurant, Delphi spoke of his resolve to end the violence, and that's when Angelo and Corteo walked in. Angelo tossed him cash and threatened his 4-year-old daughter, even dragging Corteo into it. Delphi refused, returning the money via Corteo and vowing to end Nero. Corteo chased Angelo, furious that he'd stooped to targeting families. Meanwhile, Delphi shut down several bootlegging spots, cutting their market. Nero, angry, wanted to bomb Delphi's home, while Angelo remained calm, thinking Van Gogh would act soon. Nero swore to support the good gang and asked Angelo if he'd follow him. Angelo agreed. Gerlaud tried to sway Corteo to Van Gao's side, saying prohibition would soon be repealed and then anyone could buy liquor. Van Gogh needed the best, which Corteo could supply. Corteo refused. Then, on a tip, Delphi raided Nero's distillery. Nero ordered his family killed, shocking Barbero, who argued only Delphi himself needed to back off. Corteo confronted Angelo as he packed to leave, saying revenge was only against Fango, not innocent families, but Angelo threw him money to leave for school, severing ties. Furious, Corteo threw it back. Angelo had dragged him into this. That weekend, as Delphi prepared to take his wife and daughter out, he got a call warning him to drop his investigation. He scoffed, but after sending them to the car, the phone rang again, and as he answered, an explosion boomed outside. Rushing out, he saw the car blown apart. Then his wife and daughter emerged from a warehouse, unharmed. For their safety, he halted the investigation. The next day, as Nero went out, a suspicious man approached, pestering to join the gang. Angelo, watching the surroundings, sensed something wrong, and then a worker nearby suddenly raised a rifle and opened fire at Nero. Angelo shouted. Nero and Barbero dove aside, and the man shot through like a sieve, the assassin failing to hit his mark before retreating. Van Gogh had finally moved against Fango. Only a few knew Nero's schedule, which meant there was a traitor among them. That night, Corteo went to see Van Gogh. He was the one who'd tried to have Nero killed. Van Gogh calmed the panicked Corteo, telling him not to worry, next time they'd finish Nero. And all he had to do was keep brewing and making money. Crestfallen, Corteo went home, realizing everyone here was selfish to the core. To root out the traitor, the entire Fango family went into lockdown. When Gans wanted to see Nero, Angelo blocked him. Barbero went to the cabin to meet Corteo, saying he couldn't show his face now since everyone was under suspicion. Uneasy, Corteo was whisked to Van Gao's mansion by Gerlaud in the middle of the night, only for Van Gogh to tell him he had no intention of working with him again, handing him a glass of liquor. Warren's Paradise. Corteo was shocked. Scusa had taken the recipe from Delphi's seized stock, hoping to sell it for a fortune, and with it, Corteo was now worthless. Van Gogh raised a golf club to kill him. Corteo stumbled back, tripping over something shredded, Scusa's corpse. Losing interest, Van Gogh told him to get out, adding he'd tell Nero he was the traitor. But as Van Gogh lifted the phone, Corteo rushed in, smashed a bottle into his neck, and then beat him to death with the phone. Passion driving him, he'd silence the man who would expose him, but was soon caught by Van Gao's men and offered up to Nero. No matter how they pressed him, Corteo refused to say why he wanted Nero dead, so they considered beating him to death. Everyone knew of Angelo's friendship with Corteo and felt bad, but Corteo put on a front. Back home, he nearly trashed the place. Gerlaud came, saying he'd truly seen Corteo as a friend, and asked why he'd work with Van Gogh just to kill Nero. Angelo stayed silent, then left without a word. That night, he slipped into the Fango mansion to free Nero, but before he could act, a gunshot came from the garage. Gans's wounded arm was thrown out as he shouted that Corteo had escaped through the window. Inside, a defector from Van Gao's gang lay dead. Nero ordered a citywide manhunt, and while Angelo searched too, he found nothing. Because of Corteo's betrayal, Barbero began doubting Angelo's loyalty, but Nero defended him, saying to find Corteo first. Deep at night, Angelo got a call from Corteo. If Angelo didn't kill Nero, Corteo Corteo would be killed. He'd call again at the same time tomorrow, and if Nero lived, he'd die. In Corteo's place, a gunman loomed over him. When Angelo asked who was with him, Corteo spat out one bitter phrase before hanging up. Angelo sat on the couch all night, then went to work as usual. Today, the gang was gathering. With Nero leading him, Angelo finally faced his parents' killer, Vincent. Holding his hatred in, he showed no sign. With Frade dead and Fio gone, Vincent had aged. He admitted Nero had been right all along and decided to step down, naming Nero the new boss. Nero became the true godfather, his lieutenants kissing his hand in fealty. Plans were made to push Warren's paradise into Chicago, Galassia turf, by sending it to the boss there. Angelo was chosen to deliver it. At a meal, Angelo noticed the man beside Vincent, Del Toro, a mute war veteran and loyal enforcer, and thought of the mysterious fourth man from that night, probing Nero if Del Toro had been there. Nero said he'd been supposed to but was jailed beforehand. Drunk, Nero passed out. Angelo took up a knife to kill him, but Nero stirred, saying Gans valued Angelo and had urged Nero to take him in. Angelo stayed his hand. Then Nero, drunk on truth, admitted that 7 years ago he hadn't dared fire at anyone. He'd feared disappointing his father. Since then, he'd killed many to prove himself, but perhaps nothing had changed. Angelo asked if he could now shoot the boy he'd spared that night. Nero didn't answer. Leaving the mansion, Angelo came to a house, and the one who opened the door was... The next day, Angelo boarded the ship bound for Chicago and quickly noticed Tierig watching him from the corner of his eye. Caught staring, Tierig looked a little embarrassed. After all, they were just doing their jobs. Crew was a good man, but everything still had to come to an end. Although Angelo left with no one at his side, Tierig personally saw him onto the ship, not knowing that before this, Crew had already sneaked aboard disguised as a dock worker. Tierig returned and reported to Nero, and while Nero said Angelo was innocent, Barbero's face still showed nothing but distrust. Flashback to the previous night, Angelo went to see Ganzo, the mysterious letter sender. Back then, Vincent had worried that Angelo, once on the run, would become a hidden danger, so he asked Ganzo to find a way to lure him out. Ganzo faked Angelo's death, then sent a letter to draw him back. Truth be told, he had never expected much from Angelo, yet the man quietly accomplished so much. Ganzo had killed Nero's father and son to take the gang for himself. Angelo said he could kill Nero at any time, but Vincent needed Ganzo's help. Angelo demanded Ganzo hand over Crew, promising to send Crew away and then return to kill the Finiti father and son. But he had already given Ganzo's letter to someone else for safekeeping. If Angelo died, Nero would receive that letter, with the sender's real name inside. Ganzo chuckled, opened the door, and there was Crew, hidden away by him. Once ashore, Angelo took Crew to his old apartment. Crew paid the landlord, Dashen, a hefty sum for Ganzo's future rent. The place was shabby, and under the bed Crew found piles of empty wallets. Back when Angelo had lived here, he'd been like a walking corpse until he got that letter. Now, with the fear finally gone, Crew slept peacefully for the first time in ages. The two of them acted like normal brothers, shopping for furniture, eating together, chatting, but Angelo still had to leave. They promised that when Angelo's business was done, they'd live together again. Meanwhile, the theater Finiti had been building for so long was finally ready for rehearsals, but Vincent's health was failing. As long as relations with Galatia remained stable, things could develop peacefully. Galatia wanted stability, not destruction or conquest. Vincent warned Nero to be polite and thoughtful when dealing with them. Their power was vast, so progress had to be slow. Barbero still doubted Angelo. He'd been gone a full week when Chicago was only a day away. Tierig said Barbero was overthinking it. If you finally got to Chicago, you'd enjoy yourself for a few days, right? Trying to cover for Angelo, he joked about women and fun. Just then, Angelo returned. Business had gone smoothly, their needs fully met. Barbero asked why he'd been so late. Angelo gave the excuse that he'd stayed to enjoy himself. Tierig winked and asked how the top-shelf goods were over there. Angelo dismissed them as average, with alcohol so low quality it wasn't worth mentioning. They were clearly on different wavelengths. Nothing beat Irwin's paradise. Even Chicago's boss agreed. To celebrate Angelo's return, they all drank together, Ganzo relaxing, thinking Angelo might never come back after meeting Crew. But vengeance unfinished, Angelo would never leave. 3 days later, the Finiti Theater opened, meaning Vincent would finally leave the mansion. Ganzo gave Angelo a gun, telling him to protect himself. As planned, Galatia's leader would attend the performance, symbolizing recognition of Nero's leadership. The city would be his. Still, Barbero didn't trust Angelo, even going to the docks to ask if anyone had seen Crew. Late that night, Angelo was summoned to the mansion, where Barbero pointed a stolen gun at him, accusing him of letting Crew go. Since on the day Angelo went to Chicago, Crew was also seen at the docks. Angelo stayed silent, but then Crew suddenly walked in, shocking him. Why had Crew come back? That night after Angelo left, Crew couldn't sleep, wandered out with a bottle, and the landlord warned him to stay away from Angelo. No real job, but plenty of money meant trouble. Crew declared they were brothers, forever. He poured the liquor into the river, determined they could start fresh together. But the next day, he got a call from Ganzo telling him to rush back and save Angelo, leading to this moment. Barbero shoved Crew into a chair, demanding to know why he wanted to kill Nero. Crew, unafraid, said he wanted to free Angelo. Without Nero, they could leave this boring life behind. He denied being Angelo's accomplice, but seeing how desperate Barbero was to tie them together, Crew suddenly smiled. It was because Angelo loved him, right? Barbero, humiliated, slapped Crew twice and was about to hit again when Nero stopped him. Nero pulled out a gun, but instead of firing, he handed it to Angelo. If Angelo killed Crew, he'd prove his innocence. Everyone left, leaving only the two of them. Crew calmly told Angelo to shoot. The gun would clear his name, and no one would ever bother him again. He only regretted how fast time had passed. It had been just 3 months since Angelo had returned to the city, but seeing him again made him happy. Angelo asked why he came back, but Crew just held up his pinky like when they were kids, because they were brothers. Angelo fired, ending Crew's life, and swore he'd see him soon. After killing his closest friend, Angelo finally, on the 91st day since his return, had the perfect moment for revenge. Galatia's attitude wasn't bad at all. He agreed not to pursue the Ronald matter any further, and Angelo even mentioned that Galatia's other nephew, Strega, had attended the funeral. After all, Galatia's group ruled all of Chicago. Nero noticed Angelo's pale face when he brought Strega to meet Vincent, and as expected, they had no choice but to let the Ronald matter drop. Galatia was even eager to form friendly ties with the Finiti family. Vincent's health was already crumbling, and he had long since left all business matters to Nero. The Chicago trip made Galatia admire Angelo even more, even offering him a place in their gang, but Angelo refused, saying he couldn't abandon this place. Galatia thought Nero was too soft-hearted, and to Angelo, this city was far too small. That night, Angelo secretly met with Ganzo to finalize the details of the next day's plan. Galatia and Vincent would attend the grand opening of a new theater, their box on the second floor at the far end. Bullets couldn't pierce the door panels, so to kill Vincent, they'd have to get inside. But the door had no handle on the outside. Without a key, it couldn't be opened. Ganzo arranged for 2 men to eliminate Del Toro, the guard at the door. Angelo's role was to be present, so if anything happened, Nero would definitely open the door. Once Galatia was allowed to leave, Angelo could kill Vincent and his son without suspicion, especially since the enemies list in the letter would point the blame elsewhere. Angelo knew Ganzo had been there the night Vincent conspired with Galatia to betray and kill Angelo's family, so it had to be him, the son of their victim, who pulled the trigger. After Angelo left, Strega's family appeared, revealing they had already struck a deal with Ganzo to take over once Vincent was dead. Late that night, Barbello approached Nero, wanting Angelo removed from theater security, but Nero dismissed the suspicion. Angelo had cleared his name, and now all he needed was a purpose to live. Later, Nero visited the dying Vincent, who confessed he had once killed friends and family in the name of protecting the gang, but still wondered if there could have been another way. Nero said he was prepared. Family honor came above even parents and brothers. Back home, Angelo poured himself 2 glasses of wine, silently watched by Coro. Tomorrow would end everything. The next evening, the new theater welcomed the leaders of the Finiti and Galatia families. Building it had been Vincent's lifelong dream. If negotiations succeeded, he could die in peace. Security was tight. As the curtain rose, Angelo volunteered to patrol, catching Barbello's attention. Outside, Ganzio's men attacked Del Toro during a smoke break, but Del Toro, even gravely wounded, fought back and killed them, only to be stabbed in the chest by the lurking Angelo. Barbello caught him, stabbed his shoulder, and demanded to know his goal. Angelo claimed his partners were already on their way to kill Nero and told Barbello to check the envelope in his pocket. The names were all his revenge targets. When asked about the mysterious robot, Angelo refused to answer. Torig wanted to call Nero, but Barbello stopped him, then informed Ganzo, who in turn told Torig to fetch Nero. Barbello handed over the letter, declaring Angelo a traitor. Knowing Nero wouldn't kill him, Barbello aimed his pistol, only for Ganzo to shoot Barbello in the head. Ganzo thought Angelo had failed, but Angelo smirked. Things were going exactly as planned. Nero rushed off in the wrong direction thanks to Ganzio's misleading tip, while Angelo boldly knocked on Vincent's door, claiming there was trouble and he'd been ordered to evacuate them. Galatia, trusting him completely, opened the door, and Angelo stood before them with his gun raised. Nero was too far to stop it. As Striga and Ganzio watched eagerly, Angelo named his father and declared it was time to take everything back. Vincent said nothing, but just when it seemed he would pull the trigger, Angelo turned his gun and killed Galatia instead. Chaos erupted. Striga shot Ganzio dead and ordered the Faniti family wiped out. The theater descended into gunfire, screams, and flames. In the chaos, Angelo slipped away, but the shock was too much for Vincent, whose terminal illness and weak body finally gave out, dying right there in Nero's arms. Everything was over. All he had schemed to protect was gone, the leader of Galatia dead, and Striga's gang being torn apart in the streets by the Faniti family's ruthless purge. The whole city was drowning in gunfire, and the Faniti were at the brink of annihilation. Then Nero got a mysterious phone call, said goodbye to Tirig, and left. Angelo didn't get far. He was captured by Galatia's men. Nero barged in alone, gunning down the guards until he stood face to face with Angelo. Downstairs, Jarrett waited to extract them, still bitter over Crew's death. Crew had never cared for the mafia, even ignoring business talks like a clueless fool, yet Angelo had driven him insane and ultimately to his death. Why should Crew be dead while Angelo still breathed? Angelo stayed silent until Nero kicked the chair to shut Jarrett up and pulled out a letter asking who wrote it. Angelo revealed everything. Ganzio had gathered the targets, and after returning to Lawrence, Flat, Volpe, Del Toro, Barbello, and Vano, all were killed by him. The only one left from the letter was Nero. Nero demanded to know why Angelo hadn't killed him that night at the theater. Angelo coldly said he wanted Nero and Vincent to suffer the same hell he had, to live worse than death, but Vincent turned out too weak to handle it. Hearing Angelo speak so casually of his father's death made Nero shove a gun against his head, but Angelo didn't flinch. He'd been ready to die for a long time. If Nero had the guts, he should pull the trigger now. Nero couldn't do it. Instead, he knocked Angelo out with the gun's butt, promising to kill him another day. Perig and his men later died at Galatia's hands, and the Faniti gang was completely wiped out. When Nero, Gerard, and Angelo escaped the city, Nero ditched Gerard during a breakfast run and drove off alone with Angelo. Angelo recalled that after waking, Striga had taken him in. Shooting Galatia was just a way to use their gang to destroy the Faniti, but Striga didn't mind. In fact, he thanked Angelo for killing Galatia, which put him in the boss's seat early. During Angelo's coma, the Faniti had fled to an island, prohibition was ending, and Jude City had lost its value. Striga wanted Angelo to kill Nero in exchange for freedom, but Angelo refused. He didn't care about anything anymore. Nero and Angelo stopped at a roadside diner, then headed toward the coast, camping under the open sky. Nero read the letter again, feeling the emptiness and futility of it all, then grabbed Angelo and slammed him into a tree, demanding answers. What about all the people he killed, and why not kill him? Angelo roared back, why hadn't Nero killed him 7 years ago? If Nero had just fired that night, none of this would have happened. Nero froze as memories of that night flooded back. The fight fizzled, and their relationship weirdly slipped back to old times. Nero untied him. Neither man fired a shot. They took a lazy road trip to the sea, where Angelo finally understood. You don't need a reason to live. Living itself is enough. He told Nero the reason he hadn't killed him was simply because he didn't want to. Watching Angelo's back as he walked the beach, Nero raised his gun. A shot rang out. Nero drove away from the shore, the passenger seat empty, leaving behind only a single can of pineapple.